Good afternoon, everyone. I'm coming to you live a little bit early again because I do have something else going on tonight. I'm coming at you again this afternoon, and I hope that people have been following along and enjoying this one. I've seen some comments about this one that have been quite promising, so I'm very happy that I decided to explore this particular one. So I'm very happy about that. I think without further ado, we are going to go ahead and hop right into our next chapter. Where we left off, House de Vere has been overtaken by House de Erden, and they've taken all their resources. And the deal that Dinan made with the Faceless One at the Academy of Magic at Sorcerer is completed in a sense because it was interrupted by an apprentice named Mesage who killed the Faceless One before he could kill Alton de Vere. So Alton is the only one left from House de Vere. So that means that the extermination of the house is not yet complete, which means that House Doradin's victory is not complete, which may play into things coming up here. So that brings us into Chapter 4. Here we go. Chapter 4, The First House. 4 cycles of Narbondel, 4 days later, a glowing blue disk floated up the mushroom-lined stone path to the spider-covered gate of House Doerden. The sentries watched it from the windows of the 2 outer towers and from the compound as it hovered patiently 3 feet off the ground. Word came to the ruling family only seconds later. "What can it be?" Briza asked Zachnafine, when she, the weapons master, Dinan, and Maya assembled on the balcony of the upper level. "A summons," Zack asked as much as answered. "We will not know until we investigate." He stepped up on the railing and out into the empty air, then levitated down to the compound floor. Briza motioned to Maya, and the youngest Doerden daughter followed Zack. "It bears the standard of House Bainry," Zack called up after he had moved closer. He and Maya opened the large gates, and the disc slipped in, showing no hostile movements. "Bainry," Briza repeated over her shoulder, down the house's corridor to where Matron Malice and Risen waited. "It seems that you were requested an audience, Matron Mother," Dinan put in nervously. Malice moved out to the balcony, and her husband obediently followed. "Do they know of our attack?" Briza asked in the silent code, and every member of House Doerden, noble and commoner alike, shared that unpleasant thought. House de Vere had been eliminated only a few days before, and a calling card from the first Matron Mother of Menzoberranzan could hardly be viewed as a coincidence. "Every house knows," Malice replied aloud, not believing the silence to be a necessary precaution within the boundaries of her own complex. "Is the evidence against us so overwhelming that the ruling council will be forced to action?" She stared hard at Briza, her dark eyes alternating between the red glow of infravision and the deep green they showed in the aura of normal light. "That is the question we must ask." Malice stepped up to onto the balcony, but Briza grabbed the back of her heavy black robe to stay her. "You do not mean to go with the thing?" Briza asked. Malice's answering look showed even more startlement. "Of course," she replied. "Matron Bainry would not openly call me if she meant me harm. Even her power is not so great that she can ignore the tenets of the city." "You are certain that you will be safe?" Risen asked, truly concerned. If Malice was killed, Briza would take over the house, and Risen doubted that the eldest daughter would want any male by her side. Even if the vicious female did desire a patron, Risen would not want to be the one in that position. He was not Briza's father, was not even as old as Briza. Clearly, the present patron of the house had a lot at stake in Matron Malice's continued good health. "Your concern touches me," Malice replied, knowing her husband's true fears. She pulled out of Briza's grasp and stepped off the railing, straightening her robes as she slowly descended. Briza shook her head disdainfully and motioned Risen to follow her back into the house, not thinking it wise that the bulk of the family be so exposed to unfriendly eyes. "Do you want an escort?" Zack asked as Malice sat on the disc. "I am certain that I will find one as soon as I am beyond the perimeter of our compound," Malice replied. "Matron Bainry would not risk exposing me to any danger while I am in the care of her house." "Agreed," said Zack. But do you want an escort from House Do'Urden? If one was wanted, 2 discs would have floated in, Malice said in a tone of finality. The matron was beginning to find the concerns of those around her stifling. She was the matron mother, after all, the strongest, the oldest, and the wisest, and did not appreciate others second-guessing her. To the disc, Malice said, "Execute your appointed task, and let us be done with it." Zack nearly snickered at Malice's choice of words. "Matron Malice Do'Urden," came a magical voice from the disc. "Matron Bainry offers her greetings. Too long it has been since last you two have sat in audience." "Never," Malice signaled to Zack. "Then take me to House Bainry," Malice demanded. "I do not wish to waste my time conversing with a magical mouth." Apparently, Matron Bainry had anticipated Malice's impatience, for without another word, the disc floated back out of the Do'Urden compound. Zack shut the gate as it left, then quickly signaled his soldiers into motion. Malice did not want any open company, but the Do'Urden spy network would covertly track every movement of the Bainry sled, to the very gates of the ruling house's grand compound. Malice's guess about an escort was correct. As soon as the disc swept away from the pathway to the Do'Urden compound, 20 soldiers of House Bainry, all female, moved out from concealment along the sides of the boulevard. They formed a defensive diamond around the guest matron mother. The guard at each point of the formation wore black robes emblazoned on the back with a large purple and red spider design, the robes of a high priestess. Bainry's own daughters, Malice mused, for only the daughters of a noble could attain such a rank. How careful the first matron mother had been to ensure Malice's safety on the trip. Slaves and drow commoners tripped over themselves in a frantic effort to get far out of the way of the approaching entourage, as the group made its way through the curving streets toward the mushroom grove. The soldiers of House Bainry alone wore their house insignia in open view, and no one wanted to invoke the anger of Matron Bainry in any way. Malice just rolled her eyes in disbelief and hoped that she might know such power before she died. She rolled her eyes again a few minutes later when the group approached the ruling house. House Bainry encompassed 20 tall and majestic stalagmites, all interconnected with gracefully sweeping and arching bridges and parapets. Magic and fairy fire glowed from 1,000 separate sculptures, and 100 regally adorned guardsmen paced about in perfect formations. Even more striking were the inverse structures, the 30 smaller stalactites of House Bainry. They hung down from the ceiling of the cavern, their roots lost to the high darkness. Some of them connected tip to tip with the stalagmite mounds, while others hung freely like poised spears. Ringing balconies, curving up like the edging of a screw, had been built along the length of all of these, glowing with an overabundance of magic and highlighted design. Magic, too, was the fence that connected the bases of the outer stalagmites, encircling the whole of the compound. It was a giant web, silver against the general blue of the rest of the outer compound. Some said it had been a gift from Lolth herself, with iron-strong strands as thick as a drow elf's arm. Anything touching Bainry's fence, even the sharpest of drow weapons, would simply stick fast until the matron mother willed the fence to let it free. Malice and her escorts moved straight toward a symmetrical and circular section of the fence, between the tallest of the outer towers. As they neared, the gates spiraled and wound out, leaving a gap large enough for the caravan to step through. Malice sat through it all, trying to appear unimpressed. Hundreds of curious soldiers watched the procession as it made its way to the central structure of House Bainry, the great purple-glowing chapel dome. The common soldiers left the entourage, leaving only the 4 high priestesses to escort Matron Malice inside. The sights beyond the great doors to the chapel did not disappoint her. A central altar dominated the place, with a row of benches spiraling out in several dozen circuits to the perimeter of the great hall. 2,000 drow could sit there with room to stretch. Statues and idols too numerous to count stood all about the place, glowing in a quiet black light. In the air, high above the altar, loomed a gigantic glowing image, a red and black illusion that slowly and continually shifted between the forms of a spider and a beautiful female drow. "A work of Gromf, my principal wizard," Matron Bainry explained from her perch on the altar. guessing that Malice, like everyone else who ever came to Chapel Bainry, was awestruck by the sight. "Even wizards have their place." "As long as they remember their place," Malice replied, slipping down from the now stationary disc. "Agreed," said Matron Bainry. "Males can get so presumptuous at times, especially wizards. Still, I wish that I had Gromp at my side more often these days. He has been appointed Archmage of Menzoberranzan, you know, and seems always at work on Narbondel or some other such tasks." Malice just nodded and held her tongue. Of course she knew that Bainry's son was the city's chief wizard. Everybody knew. Everybody knew, too, that Bainry's daughter Triel was the matron mistress of the academy, a position of honor in Menzoberranzan, second only to the title matron mother of an individual family. Malice had little doubt that Matron Bainry would somehow work that fact into the conversation before too long. Before Malice took a step toward the stairs to the altar, her newest escort stepped out from the shadows. Malice scowled openly when she saw the thing, a creature known as an illithid, a mind flayer. It stood about 6 feet tall, fully a foot taller than Malice, most of the difference being the result of the creature's enormous head. Glistening with slime, the head resembled an octopus with pupilless, milky white eyes. Malice composed herself quickly. Mind flayers were not unknown in Menzoberranzan, and rumors said that one had befriended Matron Bainry. These creatures, though, more intelligent and more evil than even the drow, almost always inspired shudders of revulsion. "You may call him Methil," Matron Bainry explained. "His true name is beyond my pronunciation. He is a friend." Before Malice could reply, Bainry added, "Of course, Methil gives me the advantage in our discussion, and you are not accustomed to illithids." Then, as Malice's mouth drooped open in disbelief, Matron Bainry dismissed the illithid. "You read my thought," Malice protested. Few could insinuate themselves through the mental barriers of a high priestess well enough to read her thoughts, and the practice was a crime of the highest order in drow society. "No," Matron Bainry explained, immediately on the defensive. "Your pardon, Matron Malice. Methil reads thoughts, even the thoughts of a high priestess, as easily as you or I hear words. He communicates telepathically. On my word, I did not even realize that you had not yet spoken your thoughts." Malice waited to watch the creature depart the great hall, then walked up the steps to the altar. In spite of her efforts against the action, she could not help peeking up at the transforming spider and drow image every now and then. "How fares House Do'Urden?" Matron Bainry asked, feigning politeness. "Well enough," replied Malice, more interested at that moment in studying her counterpart than in conversing. They were alone atop the altar, though no doubt a dozen or so clerics wandered through the shadows of the great hall, keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Malice had all that she could handle in hiding her contempt for Matron Bainry. Malice was old, nearly 500, but Matron Bainry was ancient. Her eyes had seen the rise and fall of a millennium by some accounts, though drow rarely lived past their 7th, and certainly not their 8th century. While drow normally did not show their age, Malice was as beautiful and vibrant now as she had been on her 100th birthday. Matron Bainry was withered and worn. The wrinkles surrounding her mouth resembled a spider's web, and she could hardly keep the heavy lids of her eyes from dropping altogether. Matron Bainry should be dead, Malice noted, but still she lives. Matron Bainry, seeming so beyond her time of life, was pregnant, and due in only a few 10 days. In this aspect, too, Matron Bainry defied the norm of the Dark Elves. She had given birth 20 times, twice as often as any others in Menzoberranzan, and 15 of those she bore were female, every one a high priestess. 10 of Bainry's children were older than Malice. "How many soldiers do you now command?" Matron Bainry asked, leaning closer to show her interest. 300, Malice replied. "Oh," mused the withered old drow, pursing a finger to her lips. "I had heard the count at 350. Malice grimaced in spite of herself. Bainry was teasing her, referring to the soldiers House Do'Urden had added in its raid on House Devere. 300, Malice said again. Of course, replied Bainry, resting back. And House Bainry holds 1,000? Malice asked, for no better reason than to keep herself on even terms in the discussion. That has been our number for many years. Malice wondered again why this old decrepit thing was still alive. Surely more than one of Bainry's daughters aspired to the position of matron mother. Why hadn't they conspired and finished Matron Bainry off? Or why hadn't any of them, some in the later stages of life, struck out on their own to form separate houses, as was the norm for noble daughters when they passed their 5th century? While they lived under Matron Bainry's rule, their children would not even be considered nobles, but would be relegated to the ranks of commoners. Have you heard of the fate of House de Vere? Matron Bainry asked directly, growing as tired of the hesitant small talk as her counterpart. Of what house? Malice asked pointedly. At this time, there was no such thing as House de Vere in Menzoberranzan. To Drow reckoning, the house no longer existed. The house never existed. Matron Bainry cackled. Of course, she replied. You are matron mother of the 9th house now. That is quite an honor. Malice nodded. But not as great an honor as matron mother of the 8th house. Yes, agreed Bainry. But 9th is only one position away from a seat on the ruling council. That would be an honor indeed, Malice replied. She was beginning to understand that Bainry was not simply teasing her, but was congratulating her as well and prodding her on to greater glories. Malice brightened at the thought. Bainry was in the highest favor of the Spider Queen. If she was pleased with House Do'Urden's ascension, then so was Lolth. Not as much of an honor as you would believe, said Bainry. We are a group of meddling old females, gathering every so often to find new ways to put our hands into places they do not belong. The city recognizes your rule. Does it have a choice? Bainry laughed. Still, drow business is better left to the matron mothers of the individual houses. Lolth would not stand for a presiding council exacting anything that even remotely resembled total rule. Do you not believe that House Bainry would have conquered all of Menzoberranzan long ago if that was the Spider Queen's will? Malice shifted proudly in her chair, appalled by such arrogant words. Not now, of course, Matron Bainry explained. The city is too large for such an action at this age. But long ago, before you were even born, House Bainry would not have found such a conquest difficult. But that is not our way. Lolth encourages diversity. She is pleased that houses stand to balance each other, ready to fight beside each other in times of common need. She paused a moment and let a smile appear on her wrinkled lips. And ready to pounce upon any that fall out of her favor. Another direct reference to House de Vere, Malice noted, this time connected to the Spider Queen's pleasure. Malice eased out of her angry posture and found the rest of her discussion, fully 2 hours long with Matron Bainry, quite enjoyable. Still, when she was back on the disc and floating out through the compound, past the grandest and strongest house in all of Menzoberranzan, Malice was not smiling. In the face of such an open display of power, she could not forget that Matron Bainry's purpose in summoning her had been twofold: to privately and cryptically congratulate her on her perfect coup, and to vividly remind her not to get too ambitious. And now we're going to do Chapter 5, because that'll bring us to the end of Part 1. Chapter 5, Weaning. For 5 long years, Vierna devoted almost every waking moment to the care of baby Drizzt. In Drow society, this was not so much a nurturing time as an indoctrinating time. The child had to learn basic motor and language skills, as did children of all the intelligent races, but a drow elf also had to be grilled on the precepts that bound the chaotic society together. In the case of a male child, such as Drizzt, Vierna spent hour after endless hour reminding him that he was inferior to the drow females. Since almost all of this portion of Drizzt's life was spent in the family chapel, he encountered no males except during times of communal worship. Even when all in the house gathered for the unholy ceremonies, Drizzt remained silent at Vierna's side, with his gaze obediently on the floor. When Drizzt was old enough to follow commands, Vierna's workload lessened. Still, she spent many hours teaching her younger brother. Presently, they were working on the intricate facial, hand, and body movements of the silent code. Often, though, she just set Drizzt about the endless task of cleaning the domed chapel. The room was barely a fifth the size of the great hall in House Bainry, but it could hold all of the dark elves of House Do'Urden with 100 seats to spare. Being a wean mother was not so bad now, Vierna thought, but still she wished that she could devote more of her time to her studies. If Matron Malice had appointed Maya to the task of rearing the child, Vierna might already have been ordained as a high priestess. Vierna still had another 5 years in her duties with Drizzt. Maya might attain high priestesshood before her. Vierna dismissed that possibility. She could not afford to worry about such problems. She would finish her tenure as Wean Mother in just a few short years. On or around his 10th birthday, Drizzt would be appointed page prince of the family and would serve all the household equally. If her work with Drizzt did not disappoint Matron Malice, Vierna knew that she would get her due. "Go up the wall," Vierna instructed. "Tend to that statue." She pointed to a sculpture of a naked drow female about 20 feet from the floor. Young Drizzt looked up at it, confused. He couldn't possibly climb up to the sculpture and wipe it clean while holding any secure perch. Drizzt knew the high price of disobedience, though, even of hesitation, and he reached up, searching for his first handhold. "Not like that!" Vierna scolded. "How?" Drizzt dared to ask, for he had no idea what his sister was hinting at. "Will yourself up to the gargoyle," Vierna explained. Drizzt's small face crinkled in confusion. "You are a noble of House Do'Urden!" Vierna shouted at him. "Or at least you will one day earn that distinction. In your neck purse you possess an emblem of the house, an item of considerable magic." Vierna still wasn't certain if Drizzt was ready for such a task. Levitation was a high manifestation of innate drow magic, certainly more difficult than lining objects in fairy fire or summoning globes of darkness. The Do'Urden emblem heightened these innate powers of drow elves, magic that usually emerged as a drow matured. Whereas most drow nobles could summon the magical energy to levitate once every day or so, the nobles of House Do'Urden, with their insignia tool, could do so repeatedly. Normally, Vierna would never have tried this on a male child younger than 10, but Drizzt had shown her so much potential in the last couple of years that she saw no harm at the attempt. "Just put yourself in line with the statue," she explained, "and will yourself to rise." Drizzt looked up at the female Pardon me, a little something in my throat there. Drizzt looked up at the female carving, then lined his feet just out in front of the thing's angled and delicate face. He put a hand to his collar, trying to attune himself to the emblem. He had sensed before that the magic coin possessed some type of power, but it was only a raw sensation, a child's intuition. Now that Drizzt had some focus and confirmation to his suspicions, he clearly felt the vibrations of magical energy. A series of deep breaths cleared distracting thoughts from the young drow's mind. He blocked out the other sights of the room. All he saw was the statue, the destination. He felt himself grow lighter, his heels went up, and he was on one toe, though he felt no weight upon it. Drizzt looked over at Vierna, his smile wide in amazement. Then he tumbled to a heap. "Foolish male!" Vierna scolded. "Try again! Try 1,000 times if you must!" She reached for the snake-headed whip on her belt. "If you fail..." Drizzt looked away from her, cursing himself. His own elation had caused the spell to falter. He knew that he could do it now, though, and he was not afraid of being beaten. He concentrated again on the sculpture and let the magical energy gather within his body. Vierna, too, knew that Drizzt would eventually succeed. His mind was keen, as sharp as any Vierna had ever known, including those of the other females of House Do'Urden. The child was stubborn, too. Drizzt would not let the magic defeat him. She knew he would stand under the sculpture until he fainted from hunger if need be. Vierna watched him go through a series of small successes and failures, the last one dropping Drizzt from a height of nearly 10 feet. Vierna flinched, wondering if he was seriously hurt. Drizzt, whatever his wounds, did not even cry out, but moved back into position and started concentrating all over again. "He is young for that," came a comment from behind Vierna. She turned in her seat to see Briza standing over her, a customary scowl on the older sister's face. "Perhaps," Vierna replied, "but I'll not know until I let him try." "Whip him when he fails," Briza suggested, pulling her cruel six-headed instrument from her belt. She gave the whip a loving look, as if it were some sort of pet, and let a snake's head writhe about her neck and face. "Inspiration." "Put it away," Vierna retorted. "Drizzt is mine to rear, and I need no help from you." "You should watch how you speak to a high priestess," Briza warned, and all of the snakeheads, extensions of her thoughts, turned menacingly toward Vierna. "As Matron Malice will watch how you interfere with my tasks," Vierna was quick to reply. Briza put her whip away at the mention of Matron Malice. "Your tasks," she echoed scornfully. "You are too yielding for such a chore. Male children must be disciplined. They must be taught their place." Realizing that Vierna's threat held dire consequences, the older sister turned and left. Vierna let Briza have the last word. The Wean mother looked back to Drizzt, still trying to get up to the statue. "Enough!" she ordered, recognizing that the child was tiring. He could barely get his feet off the ground. "I will do it!" Drizzt snapped back at her. Vierna liked his determination, but not the tone of his reply. Perhaps there was some truth to Briza's words. Vierna snapped the snake-headed whip from her belt. A little inspiration might go a long way. Vierna sat in the chapel the next day, watching Drizzt hard at work polishing the statue of the naked female. He had levitated the full 20 feet in his first attempt this day. Vierna could not help but be disappointed when Drizzt did not look back to her and smile at the success. She saw him now, hovering up in the air, his hands a blur as they worked the brushes. Most vividly of all, though, Vierna saw the scars on her brother's naked back, the legacy of their inspirational discussion. In the infrared spectrum, the whip line showed clearly, trails of warmth where the insulating layers of skin had been stripped away. Vierna understood the gain in beating a child, particularly a male child. Few drow males ever raised a weapon against a female, unless under the order of some other female. "How much do we lose?" Vierna wondered aloud. "What more could one such as Drizzt become?" When she heard the words spoken aloud, Vierna quickly brushed the blasphemous thoughts from her mind. She aspired to become a high priestess of the Spider Queen, Lolth the Merciless. Such thoughts were not in accord with the rules of her station. She cast an angry glare on her little brother, transferring her guilt, and again took out her instrument of punishment. She would have to whip Drizzt again this day, for the sacrilegious thoughts he had inspired within her. So the relationship continued for another 5 years, with Drizzt learning the basic lessons of life in drow society, while endlessly cleaning the chapel of House Do'Urden. Beyond the supremacy of female drow, a lesson always accentuated by the wicked snake-headed whip, the most compelling lessons were those concerning the surface elves, the fairies. Evil empires often bound themselves in webs of hate toward fabricated enemies, and none in the history of the world were better at it than the drow. From the first day they were able to understand the spoken word, drow children were taught that whatever was wrong in their lives could be blamed on the surface elves. Whenever the fangs of Vierna's whip sliced into Drizzt's back, he cried out for the death of a fairy. Conditioned hatred was rarely a rational emotion. And there we have it. That ends our reading for today and ends the first part of the book. So, we're going to be following Drizzt more as a child now. So, we'll see how that goes. All right. Well, I hope everybody has a good afternoon here, and I will be back tomorrow. Everybody stay safe and stay healthy, and I will see you then. Bye-bye, everyone. See you next time.